The officer's words cut clean and loud. "Get lost, clown," spoken into a microphone as if the city itself needed permission to laugh. Cameras turned, phones recorded. The square leaned in to enjoy a simple, public humiliation. Joker smiled like a man who had rehearsed silence for years, and when he finally answered, it wasn't with a joke, but with a quiet that felt more like a promise. In the time it took the crowd to finish applauding, something invisible shifted. Alliances recalculated. A ledger of old betrayals flipped open, and the night that had been ordinary began to rearrange itself around a new, dangerous order. Minutes later, they would regret how easily they had chosen a face to mock, not because they were cowards, but because they failed to recognize the weight behind a man who had nothing left to lose. The square went back to breathing like nothing had happened. Laughter thinned, phones lowered, and the officer, badge polished, voice still echoing, adjusted his cap as if he'd just restored order. Joker stood where he was told to stand, hands relaxed at his sides, eyes taking inventory. He didn't glare. He didn't bow. He watched the way a chess player watches a board after a reckless move. The crowd mistook that calm for defeat. They always did. Joker had learned early that humiliation was a language power spoke fluently. It wasn't the insult itself that stayed with you. It was the permission it gave others to join in. He remembered rooms where laughter arrived before truth and promises were broken with smiles. Tonight felt familiar. The officer's voice hadn't been cruel by accident. It had been practiced, shaped by years of knowing exactly who would never talk back. "Smile," someone whispered near him. Joker smiled. It wasn't a grin meant to entertain. It was a smile that closed a door. He walked away without looking back, coat brushing against strangers who didn't know they were passing through the aftermath of a decision. The city welcomed him with its usual noises, sirens like distant lullabies, traffic humming secrets to itself. He took a side street, then another, letting the crowd's memory dissolve behind him. Revenge, he believed, wasn't about anger. Anger rushed. Revenge waited. That officer's name surfaced easily. It always did. Names have a way of floating to the top when they're weighted with consequence. Joker remembered a different square years ago. A different uniform, a different laugh that had sounded the same. A promise to look the other way. A promise kept, but not for the right reasons. Corruption wasn't a monster. It was a habit. Tonight's insult was just a symptom. Joker ducked into a diner lit by flickering neon and ordered coffee. He wouldn't drink. He watched reflections move across the window. Faces layered over faces. A city hiding inside itself. He thought of the officer's hands. Clean nails. Confident gestures. He thought of the people who had learned to be quiet because those hands decided when silence was convenient. The city had taught Joker how to speak without raising his voice. He paid for the coffee and left a tip that felt like an apology. Outside, rain began as if summoned by an old agreement. The night darkened, not with threat, but with intention. Across town, the officer celebrated. He replayed the moment in his head, the easy authority, the laughter that followed. He didn't notice the thin crack forming in the certainty of his evening. He didn't notice the patrol car stalling once before catching again. He didn't notice how the city had gone oddly attentive, like it was listening. Joker moved through back corridors of memory and stone, places where the city forgot to watch itself. He didn't need force. He needed timing. He needed people to see what they already knew and pretend they'd just learned it. He left no signatures, no riddles. Chaos, when done right, didn't announce itself. It arrived politely. By midnight, whispers began, a sudden reassignment that made no sense, a call unanswered that should have been, a superior smile that didn't reach the eyes. The officer felt the shift but named it stress. He poured a drink and laughed at the news, telling himself the city always overreacted. He told himself that men like Joker didn't matter. Joker stood on a rooftop and watched the river swallow light. He spoke softly to no one. "You confuse kindness with weakness," he said, as if rehearsing a line he hoped wouldn't be needed. He remembered the people who'd paid the price for uniforms worn like costumes. He remembered how justice, when cornered, learned to bargain. Morning came with a bruise-colored sky. The officer arrived at the precinct early, eager to outrun the unease. Conversations hushed as he passed. Doors closed a little too quickly. A notice waited on his desk. Temporary, procedural, nothing to worry about. He read it twice, then a third time. The paper didn't change, but the room did. Outside, Joker blended into the crowd again, face unremarkable, posture loose. He passed the square where it had begun. A worker scrubbed the pavement, erasing nothing that mattered. Joker paused, listening to the city explain itself in fragments. Somewhere nearby, a siren cut off mid-wail. He smiled, not because it was over, but because it had started. And as he turned the corner, a voice behind him called his name. Not loud, not angry, afraid. Joker didn't turn around right away. He let the fear in the voice finish echoing, let it decide whether it wanted to become anger or shame. When he finally faced the sound, he found the officer standing alone at the edge of the square, uniform suddenly too heavy for his shoulders. The crowd moved around them like a river avoiding a stone. No one wanted to be close enough to be remembered. "You," the officer said, swallowing the word like it had teeth. "What did you do?" Joker tilted his head, studying him with a curiosity that felt almost kind. "I smiled," he said. "You heard me do it." The officer's hands twitched near his belt, a habit that had always brought comfort. Today, it brought nothing. His world had cracked open since dawn, calls unanswered, favors denied, doors that used to open now requiring permission. He had spent years mistaking immunity for respect. Now he felt naked inside a system that suddenly remembered rules. "I was joking," the officer said, desperate to shrink the past into something harmless. "You took it the wrong way." Joker stepped closer, lowering his voice so the city wouldn't feel accused. "No," he said gently. "You meant it the way you mean everything, like you'd already decided who mattered." They stood there, two men framed by a city that pretended neutrality. Joker saw the officer as he truly was. Not a monster, not a villain, just a man who had learned which lines he could cross without consequence. That was always the most dangerous kind. "You ruined my life," the officer said. It came out thin. Joker smiled, and this time there was sadness in it. "I rearranged it," he replied. "You built it on borrowed ground." The officer laughed once, sharp and ugly. "You think you're some kind of hero?" Joker didn't answer right away. He glanced at the buildings, at windows that reflected stories no one ever told out loud. "Heroes," he said finally, "need permission. I don't." He walked past the officer, brushing his sleeve, a contact so light it felt imaginary. The officer stood frozen, waiting for something dramatic. Sirens, hands violence. None came. That was the worst part. The city simply continued, as if it had accepted a correction. By afternoon, the officer's name was being said carefully. Old incidents resurfaced in conversation. Not accusations, just memories people had stopped suppressing. A promotion that arrived too quickly. A complaint that vanished. A favor that cost someone else everything. Nothing illegal enough to explode, but enough to rot. The system didn't punish him. It stepped back and let gravity do the work. Joker watched from a distance as the officer exited the precinct with a box that felt heavier than it looked. No escort, no ceremony. Just a man discovering how quiet a fall could be. Joker felt no triumph, only a dull ache where certainty used to live. Revenge never healed. It clarified. That night, rain returned, tapping on rooftops like a polite knock. Joker walked until the city thinned into shadows and water. He thought of all the times he'd been laughed at, dismissed, reduced to a punchline because it was easier than listening. He hadn't broken the officer. He had held up a mirror and stepped aside. A figure emerged from the darkness ahead. Someone Joker recognized not by face, but by posture. Another uniform, another kind. The man spoke without threat. "You make things inconvenient," he said. Joker stopped. "Only for liars." The man hesitated, then nodded. "There are others like him." Joker's eyes softened, just a fraction. "I know," he said. "That's why this works." The man looked uneasy. "What do you want?" Joker considered the question as rain stitched the night together. "For people to stop mistaking silence for peace," he said, "and laughter for justice." The man left without another word. Joker remained, listening to the city exhale. Somewhere behind him, the officer sat alone, scrolling through a phone that no longer loved him, realizing too late that power was never loud. It was agreed upon. Joker turned toward the river, his reflection breaking apart with each ripple. He spoke to it like an old friend. "I don't save the city," he said. "I remind it." As he walked into the night, the square behind him looked ordinary again, but the city had learned something it wouldn't forget, that mocking the quiet man is easy until you realize he was the only one listening. And somewhere, deep in the machinery of order, a new fear took root, not of chaos, but of accountability wearing a smile. Sometimes the most dangerous revenge doesn't come with explosions or bloodshed. It comes with truth, patience, and a smile that lets the city destroy itself. If this story made you question who the real villains are, then remember, chaos isn't always the enemy. Sometimes it's the cure.